Is there evidence of continuity? That is something that we would be talking about, we would be seeing. And what are the spheres that we are looking at? Basically the social, economic, political, and our main focus would be the cultural aspect that is there. In terms of the historical aspect that is there, the first who brought about or who spoke a little in terms of feudalism was actually B.N. Datta that you have. He spoke in terms of a class struggle that you're looking at. Then came Dange, who spoke in terms of a slave society in later Vedic. And all of you who've done ancient India, you know that there was no concept of a slave society in ancient India or medieval that you're looking at. Especially because my forte is ancient, I will remain with ancient India. So later Vedic has no evidence at all in terms of a slave society. So what were the problems then? The problem that you're looking at then is that there is lack of availability of sources, or maybe what you can say is also knowledge of the sources that you have. So there is a limitation that we are looking at when we talk in terms of these historians that are there. Now, something that was there in terms of what Marx had given us. Marx had categorized the ancient society in terms of the Asiatic mode of production. And when you look at the feature that is there, we talk in terms of ownership, we talk in terms of absence of private property, absence of urban centers, self-sustaining. If you look at it, you find it's more of a stagnant economy society that Karl Marx was talking in terms of. Instead of looking at a society which is dynamic, you find that there is a problem in the formulae that was devised by Karl Marx himself. D.D. Kusambi was the first who actually brings about, and he says that this whole idea of unchangelessness that is there, which is a part of the Asiatic mode of production, is not applicable. And he tried to show the dynamism of society through what he termed as a two-tier system of feudalism itself, which you've read in terms of feudalism from above and feudalism from below that is there. Now, what were the main features that were defined in terms of feudalism that is there? One of the things that you find is that there is the beginning of a landed intermediaries that we will be talking in terms of. Something that is also there is in terms of taxation. Now, this is one of a mechanism that would come about in terms of how taxation should be taken about, and why is this, there is a need for this change that we are looking at. Now, the author or the historian who actually worked in detail about feudalism was Professor R.S. Sharma, whose books you must have read even as first years. You have to read all the 3 books that are there from him. Now, what did he talk in terms of? He spoke in terms of commodity production, decline in urban centers, self-sufficient economy, and he also said that there is a scarcity. He did not say that there is no metallic currency. He said that there is a scarcity of metallic currency that is there. But there was a lacuna in his earlier work that is there. And the lacuna was that there was emphasis on external factor. Now, this is a lacuna that he would actually go ahead and correct. And these are great scholars that we've had, and you find that these scholars are the ones who actually could revisit their own work, and they were able to bring about, look into the dynamism of their own work. What did he do? He then realized that there was too much of emphasis on external factor. So he re-looked at his own work and saw that there should be, or there must be, some internal contradictions. The internal contradiction that he talks about is basically in terms of the Kali age or the Kali crisis that he talked in terms of, and says that this is the prelude to feudalism itself. So what you do see is that he revisits his own work, and he is actually then the whole thing was that how should we look at it, and that's where the idea of the Kali age or the Kali crisis comes in. We've all done what is a Kali age crisis that we have. The first and foremost that we have is the Wanmei itself. It's not that Wanmei actually begins at this point of time. It actually began much before this time frame itself. But the problem that emerges is that the intensity of it increases. You also find that there is a crisis because the Vaishyas and the Shudras that you have refuse to do their work, and their work was in terms of doing the labor or paying the taxes that is there. This antagonism needed actually to this antagonism you find needed to be looked into, and you find a mechanism was needed. What was the mechanism that you have? And that mechanism was of granting of the land that you have to either the military chiefs or to the priest and so forth that you have. Now, the important part that you have is that when R.S. Sharma brings about the Kali age crisis, he does not do away with the other aspects. So it fits in neatly into the paradigm that was formulated by Professor Sharma. Professor B.D. Chattopadhyay was absolutely unhappy about the Kali age crisis that you have. He saw it in terms of a breakdown. Whereas Professor Sharma's whole argument was that it is a continual crisis, it's not a breakdown that is there. So it's not a rupture that you are looking at, nor is it a termination of the earlier and coming in of the new that is there. So nothing like that was evident. When do we get our first inscriptional evidence of the Wanmei that is in your 2nd century BCE? First is what we'll be doing in the 2nd semester, the Satavahans that is there. So you find that the feudal mode of production is nothing but a mechanism that you have for extraction of surplus that is there. And the first thing that we have to realize is that the Kali age crisis actually is acceptable only in the heartland, because that's the area where you had too much of labor. When you look at the peripheral areas, there is not so much of labor, so you find another kind of crisis that would be there, where you would find that you needed a mechanism by which you would be able to go in for an agrarian expansion itself. So in the areas where you have evidence of peripheral areas, for example, there you find the idea of forced labor would come about because you do not have so much of labor. And in the heartland areas, you will find that there is the idea of the eviction itself that is there. Now, this is what was formulated by Professor Sharma. Professor B.D. Chattopadhyay and Kulki, of course, put an alternative paradigm, which is what we're going to look at, and they talk in terms of a process of new regional state formations. And because there is the idea of integration, you are looking at it in terms of formation of local states. You also look at the idea of new regional states coming in. And most importantly, you will find that in the peripheral areas, the tribes are actually becoming peasants. You find there is evidence of integration, acculturation, and you see from the Puranic times itself, you have a lot of evidence of acculturation of deities, of rituals, and so forth that you have. You have the growth of regional languages, regional literature, and of course, you would see this in terms of a cultural aspect. Now, one of the areas that you have is architecture, where you see the evidence of regional growth. So regional growth, we are going to look at it in terms more of culture than anything else. You would find you have different types of temple architecture, different types of temples that would come about. There will be the idea of differentiation that would be seen in the temple architecture itself. Something that was not present earlier but comes about at this point of time is that of a paramount deity, and you have these subsidiary deities that were there. Now, these subsidiary deities also you would find are something that comes about only at this point of time. So there is a hierarchy that you find within architecture in terms also of the gods and goddesses that you're finding. And it's not that it's reflected only in the Brahmanical faith. If you're looking at Buddhism, Jainism, you would find it being present along with Tantricism itself. Now, think of the time frame that you do before the feudal aspect. And that is in terms of Sanchi, Bharu, Mathura, Western Ghats, all these areas that you have. You have evidence of architecture. Now, what you would find is, if you look at this, you do not find that there is evidence of any hierarchy over here. When you're looking at it's an entire Jatak story that is being told to you. But in this Jatak story, there is no hierarchy. There is no evidence of one dominant figure standing out, which is not something that you would see in the art and architecture of the time of the so-called feudal time that we are looking at from 600 CE onwards. If you look at this whole structure, you would say, what is this? This is evidence of something standing out. But no, if you're actually looking at it, this is part of a broken chakra that we are looking at. So it is, the idea is representation in terms of how Buddhism is being portrayed in art itself that you find. Again, something that you can be seeing is, this is telling you that a story is being unfurled. And the story that you have is the entire Jatak story that you find. The point that I'm trying to then stress is that there is no evidence of hierarchy that you find is seen in art and architecture or in sculptural aspect when you see the pre-600 CE onwards. When you look at the evidence that you have of the architecture from, say, 4th CE onwards, there is evidence of a hierarchy that you have. Now, Bhitargaon temple is something that you do with the Guptas itself. And you find that all the time we thought that when you look at it, we are seeing that this temple, the tiles that you're looking at, is something that we always thought that it is very aesthetic, it is very artistic. But if you look at it very closely, you actually find that there are 9 tiles that you are looking at. This has to have some kind of a symbolic aspect. And the symbolic aspect that you have is in terms of a hierarchy. The hierarchy that you see in your social, political, economic sphere is something that is being replicated in your architecture itself. So when you look at the Bhitargaon temple, you know that the idea of feudalism, the idea of the Samant and the ones who are below, all that tile that you have, that is something that's very, very evident that you have. Something that also comes about from the Bhitargaon temple, which is the beginning you will find, and that is in terms of, if you look at these structures that are there, you realize one is towering over the other. This is a new feature that you have, which comes about in terms of what we term as the feudal art architecture that you are looking at. So you know that this temple that you're looking at is a temple that is for the main deity. The other smaller ones that you have would be for the minor deities themselves. So this is the first evidence that you have in terms of architecture that we are looking at. There has to be, when you have this kind of evidence, there is but natural that there is going to be evidence of patronage. Now the patronage that you have, that this kind of temple structure that you have, would have to get patronage from the military chiefs or from the landed aristocracy and so forth that you have. What was the reason for this kind of patronage? The reason for this kind of patronage is that there is a need for legitimation. There is a need for their own glory that they are looking at. And when we look at the temple structures from Puri and so forth, we will find that this is going to be explicated here. What is the function? It's basically to impress, it's the glory, you're also showing the wealth that you have, and of course, the most important is legitimation, because that is something that you find is absent. At this point of time, you will find, and that's what we have spoken in terms of, that there are regional states that are coming about. Since there is evidence of regional state, you also have evidence of regional schools of art that come about. So you have the temple structures at Khajuraho, you have temple structures at Bhubaneswar, you have it at Puri, you have them in Rajasthan, you have them in Gujarat, and so forth that you have. I'm not getting into the detailing of all that. For us, what is important, each regional school could make changes, but they always make changes within their own style itself. So it is not that they were going to be copying others. If you look at the Khajuraho temple structure that is there, you can make out the evidence which is the paramount deity that you are looking at. This is the main structure that you have, and you can see the shrines which are smaller and how each deity that you have is important that you would find. But the importance of the deity is reflected on the size of the temple itself. So we all know that there is a gradation or a hierarchy amidst the deities that you are looking at. Here you can actually see the difference that is there. This is just to show you what kind of hierarchy we are looking at. The same kind of hierarchy is something that we find even in the social economic sphere, along with the political, of course. So for us, it's important to realize that reflection of political formation can be seen in the cultural aspect itself. This is again the same kind of an evidence that you have. And this is again in terms of the gradation in hierarchy that you are looking at. Something that I should have told you is that if you look at this, or maybe you can see it in this. If you look at this, this has all the features of the temple that you're looking at. If you look at the Khajuraho temple, you will find that the Amalka is something that you have present visibly for the naked eye of the pilgrim at all these sites that you're, whether you're looking at Puri, whether you're looking at Khajuraho, Rajasthan, and so forth. But when you look at the South Indian temples, you will find it will be a part of the structure. It is never visible to a pilgrim that you find. So these are regional styles that we would be looking at. The Lingaraj temple is again, you can see the Amalka very clearly over here, and you can see. Now this is the main Lingaraj temple that you have, and these are the smaller. And if you look at one of these, this is one of the smallest ones that you have, and this is actually dedicated to Ram and Sita. Now, of course, we can go in and say that they are gods or they are not gods. I'm not getting into that debate at the moment because that's outside at the moment for me. For us, what is important, because if you ask me, I would always say they are not deities that are there. So what are we then looking at? We are looking at a hierarchy that is very, very evident that you have. When you see the Konark temple, and this is interesting that for 13 years, the Ganga ruler that you had actually spent all his resources making this temple. And he made sure that this temple was actually the tallest and the most grand that you have. And it was, of course, the most grand looking temple. We have also spent all our resources in trying to destroy the temple, I would say, because when you look at it now, it's actually a destroyed temple that we find. It is beautiful, it's spectacular. If you've not seen it, I think you should actually go and see it, even though what you will see now is more a destroyed Konark temple that is there. It's beautiful in the sense that you can actually see, if you see this, you can actually make out these are the chariot wheels. And this, which is under renovation, are actually the horses of Surya himself. So you can actually, if you see it, it looks like a rath that is there, which is being taken which is being taken off by the horses that you find. It's exquisite, but nothing as grand as it was remains anymore. If you look at the Mukteshwar temple, the reason why I took the Mukteshwar temple is because it's one of the insignificant temples in front of Lingaraj, but the idea remains the same. And I mean, without my saying so, you can just know that this is the main shrine that we are looking at. This is the main sanctum that you find, and the others, of course, are very, very subsidiary that you are looking at. Again, same thing. I'm just trying to highlight the same aspect in terms of hierarchy that is there. Now, the Jagannath temple also, so whether you're looking at temples related to Shiv or you're looking at temples related to Vishnu, there is no difference that we are looking at. And without doubt, you know that this is the main sanctum area that you have. This is where Vishnu is resting. And you have litter of small temples around the main Jagannath temple itself. And all of them you find are these subsidiary deities that we are looking at. This is just to tell you, I'm not getting into the detailing of it, of course. This is just to tell you that each region had its own temple structure. So whether you're looking at the Nagar style or whether you're looking at the Dravid style, you find both of them have their own styles. within the Nagar style, you actually, when you look at the Konark temple, you realize that this is one of the best that you actually find. When we look at the ideas of art, something that becomes dominant, you find is the idea of shikhar itself. And if you look at, remember the ones that we've just seen, all of them have an elongated shikhar that